Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Sarah and I make videos about health and fitness and all of those things, endurance sports. So if that's something that you're into, you can find all those there buttons down below. Do it for your health. Do it for your performance. Do it for the children. Think of the children. Something wrong with me. But today's video, I want to talk about things I hate about Zwift. Oh my God, the gasps. The pearl clutching. And before like the three of you who have not seen my videos before go down there in the comments and accost me for being a bully and committing the heresy of insulting Zwift and I should just get off the platform if I hate it so much, understand this. I have been on Zwift since 2015, so longer than 95% of the users who are currently on this platform. I make several videos helping people to navigate through Zwift, which isn't altogether intuitive. I encourage people to get on this platform all the time. I have said repeatedly that Zwift is the best thing that has ever happened to indoor training and arguably one of the top 5 best things to happen to structured training, period. I think Zwift is great. I think they do a lot of great things. I constantly extol the virtues of this platform, a platform that is going to be the title sponsor for a women's Tour de France in 2022. That is freaking incredible. I love this platform, but the critiques I'm going to give in this video are kind of the sentiment that we hold the things that we care about most to a higher standard. Whether it's our family, our friends, our tribes, in this case, a software, we want those things to do the best that they possibly can because we want to represent them and want them to represent us. So none of this is going to be throwing shots across the bow unnecessarily to poke fun at Zwift. These are honest, thoughtful critiques and criticisms that I have of the platform as a long-term user and somebody who wants to continue to see the platform progress forward. Mark my words, if they come out with an IPO, I'm going to be one of the first in line to invest in the company. I do believe in it, but I think that they can do better by us as the paying customers. And I want to make actually a series of videos instead of one video because these are not just piddly shit complaints. These are some kind of nagging issues that are more thoughtful in my delivery, and I want to open it up for a dialogue for those people who have been around the platform or maybe new to the platform to weigh in with their response. I'm not saying everything here is a super high priority, and none of these are deal breakers for using the platform, but they are things that I would like to see Zwift fix. A lot of these are probably on Zwift's radar as well. I'm not going to say that any of these are even original. I think a number of people have echoed what I'm going to say here, but it's worth the conversation, especially for those who watch this channel. Many of you have found my channel through Zwift. Zwift may or may not see this video. I've had members of Zwift HQ watch some of my videos in the past. If they see this video, great. I'm not going to say anything that I wouldn't say directly if given the opportunity. If they don't, it's to open it up a conversation with the subscribers, the people who are using this platform day in and day out, and I'd love to hear your input on these things I'm going to talk about. Now, I've been thinking about making this video for several months now, but just timing got away from me. And I'm glad that I inadvertently waited until now because a couple weeks ago, actually, Simon Schofield released his Zwiftcast with the Chief Product Officer. I think he goes by YC, and he had kind of touched on some of the things that I wanted to talk about and some of the overarching theme to these issues I'm going to bring up over these next several videos in a way that really fits in quite well, right? Getting it right from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from Zwift, and giving my critique and my commentary on the responses that YC gave in that interview, and an understanding of where I come from, and an opinion that I think is shared by a lot of people, especially those who have been on the platform for 2 or more years. I'm going to link the podcast link down below. It's definitely worth a listen. I give Simon Schofield a ton of credit. He does not lob up softballs to these folks at Zwift HQ. Usually 2 to 3 times a year, he has a good, compelling interview with somebody at Zwift HQ, usually 1 per year with Eric Min, the CEO, and then 1 or 2 with maybe somebody who's a lead developer, in this case, a chief product officer, and he asks them challenging questions. Yes, the questions are pre-approved. That's usually how the podcast world works, right? It's not supposed to be a gotcha or hard-hitting journalism. But I think this interview really does kind of exemplify the fact that he's got a lot that he's trying to represent the community for, that he's coming forward to Zwift saying, hey man, what gives? Like, this is what people are asking for. You owe them answers. You haven't communicated very well in the past. This is your opportunity to kind of clear the air. So I would recommend listening to that podcast. He pulls on a lot of the threads that I want to talk about. And the first one touches on the first issue that really bothers me about Zwift. And this is going to sound harsh, but it's not how it's intended. And what I don't like is Zwift continually pandering to the lowest common denominator of equipment. And I mean equipment to run the software, not equipment in terms of bikes. I'm talking about, your computer, your tablet, whatever you're using to run the platform. They try to cast this huge net in terms of what equipment can be used for this platform. And I think it blows up in their faces very often. I did a video several months ago about an update Zwift made to their platform to try to kind of keep lower level equipment, the potatoes, on life support. And I had commented in that video that what they have listed on their website is like that good, better, best for minimum specification requirements is unsatisfactory. I think what they have listed as good really should not be promoted as a supported use of the platform. They're trying to not leave anybody out and be inclusive by allowing lower level equipment and trying to kind of, again, keep it on life support, but for how long? As more and more people join the platform, these continue to break down, people get freezes, crashes, avatars going in weird directions, results that don't match in races what they see on the screen, just kind of a poor experience. But they continue to publish that this equipment is acceptable. And then what they do is they spend development resources and support resources keeping these pieces of equipment afloat instead of drawing a hard line in the sand saying, listen, if you're using a computer, this is the benchmark that you need, the minimum benchmark you need for 1080, and then this is the high performance benchmark that you're gonna need for like 4K or high performance. You're not going to play World of Warcraft on a Commodore 64 or an Apple IIe. You're not going to play the newest Call of Duty or the newest Assassin's Creed game on a PlayStation 1. At a certain point, you have to buy the tool that does the job. And buying a computer that was designed to do some low-level, web browsing, word processing, general office suite computing, it's not built to run a game engine. It's not built for that graphical intensity. Even if the graphics don't look that advanced, that's still not what those computers are built for. And I'm not going to blame the customer here. If you buy a computer for 2021, you think that, well, a 2021 computer has to be able to play a game that's kind of been around for 5 or 6 years, right? Without an innate understanding of how graphics processing units work. And I don't expect the customer to understand that. That's on the software developer to say, listen, these are the minimum system requirements, and you can even say, this is why. This is why this is required, right? When you buy an entry-level $300 laptop, you're really just paying for some basic hardware there. And that hardware has not really gotten a ton better in the past 5 years. It's just basics, right? It's got, kind of a shitty build quality. They're kind of meant to be disposable in some ways, like they last 1 or 2 years and you upgrade to the newest one, but they're not intended for playing these games, especially something that requires the actual hardware itself to draw out the characters, to draw out the avatars. And I talked about that in detail in the other video. I'm not going to rehash that here. I will link that down below if you're a little bit more curious as to where the bottlenecking is in terms of equipment. Suffice it to say, they spend a lot of resources supporting this low-level equipment. And that question was asked. Simon asked the question to the effect that, we have people who have been on the platform for a while that are looking for more. We're looking for more graphics. We're looking for new worlds to have more detail, right? I think they did a great job with McCurry. They could have done more. And the question that people are asking is like, hey man, I want higher performance. I want to see more avatars drawn on my screen. I want more interaction. And you're throttling my performance to pander to this low-level equipment. The way that YC answered the question was unsatisfying to me. He kind of gave what sounded like a corporate-y answer, creating the false dichotomy between, new users and old users, and, it's not mutually exclusive, that whole rising tide raises all ships, so to speak, and, creating a better environment for them will create a better environment for all. And I'm not saying that he was being disingenuous, because I do think that that's what he honestly believes. But the reality is, if you think about it from a common sense perspective, and this isn't from the perspective of the customer, mind you, not me bitching because I don't have better graphics. I have worked in middle and upper management for both customer-facing environments as well as indirect customer satisfaction-based environments. And I understand the importance of building a close, careful customer base. And there's a certain point that you have to set expectations. And this is even more important in a subscription model where your loyalty is dependent on having a clear line of communication and expectations in both directions. And I don't think by trying to continue to resuscitate and pander to low-level equipment, I honestly believe you're doing your customers a disservice at that point. You're setting them up for some dissatisfaction in the future because of the struggles that people are having with low-level equipment. You bring somebody on who's new to the platform in general, and then they're trying to navigate their way through low-level equipment because maybe they don't have an intense understanding of equipment needs. You know, they're gonna have those crashes and they're gonna attribute it to a Zwift problem. So one of two things is gonna happen. They're going to leave dissatisfied quietly, or they're gonna glut up your support network in the forums, and they're going to be calling you up and saying, hey man, what gives? What's wrong with your program? Fix this. And it's taking resources away from other issues. There's nothing wrong with Zwift. The hardware they're using is just not acceptable to play the game. Now, I know there's a number of you out there that use like older computers and laptops to run the game with the understanding that it's really not going to give you the highest level of performance. And you're willing to take your quality settings and turn them down to low. But the psychology of most people, if they've got their laptop from 2020 and they're gonna open up Zwift and play that game, and they're gonna see options, quality, low, medium, high, 99.9% of people are gonna crank that up to high because it's available. Well, why would I throttle my performance? Not realizing that the game is not right-sizing the performance options to that piece of equipment. Zwift cannot possibly take on that undertaking. So now you have to deal with all this downstream effect. I don't know that it's worth chasing that down. I really don't see the value in doing that. You're going to have some endemic turnover anyway from new customers. Some people aren't going to make it past the free trial. Some people get really excited about fitness for like 5 minutes after January 1st, and then their Peloton bikes and their Zwift systems, they all turn into laundry racks. Some people really get into it, but they realize that, you know, it's just going to be too difficult for them to get on and off. They live in a small apartment or a small house, and they have to set it up and tear it down every time, and it's just too much of a burden on their time to leverage 30 to 40 minutes every time they ride to this set up and tear down. Some people, $15 to $16 a month is just too expensive for them. There's going to be a number of people who fall out of the system, period. There's no reason to add more turnover based on dissatisfaction with the gameplay when you made a mistake from the beginning. You should have told them there was a bare minimum equipment requirement for entry that did not include onboard graphics on computers and laptops. They need to have dedicated graphics. And the thing is you have a bailout option. I hate Apple, but if I were Zwift, I'd be selling that Apple TV to the end of time, man. $80 to $100 gets you into one of the most stable Zwift platform environments that we have out there. It just works. Yes, it's missing some features. I'll probably talk about that in one of the future videos. All in all, when it comes to being able to ride and race, Apple TV does it very well. It works every single time. No, it's not 4K, but neither is a low-level computer. But it's got nice, crispy 1080 graphics. It does a good job. I'd be bundling that with trainers. I would be doing whatever I could to partner with Apple to sell those things. If I were Zwift, I'd be selling a standalone box. Sell it for 50 or 60 bucks. The only thing the thing does is it has some ANT Plus dongles built in or some Bluetooth dongles built in. It's got a Wi-Fi transmitter and receiver, and then it has the game built into it. Man, you could sell that all day for $50 or $60 and have a rock solid experience with Zwift and not have to worry about pandering to all of these different computer specifications at the expense of the people who have been around. Again, this isn't just me being selfish. This is me thinking about Zwift as a business. Right? It's shortchanging a lot of your customers, and some people are not as patient as many of us who have been around. We've been abundantly patient with a pretty slow trajectory over time when it comes to Zwift because we started when the company was small. So we are kind of conditioned to be patient because we care about the company. But it is extremely frustrating when we have been waiting in the wings for certain elements of the game to be launched, and all of that time and all of those resources seem to be leveraged towards, onboarding new customers and trying to cast this huge net to get people in the door. It's not about creating a dichotomy. It's about thinking about what happens when you take those new customers and you want to convert them into a long-term customer. There's a disconnect there. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is kind of an extension of that in terms of trying to cast a huge net to a very wide audience, and it's the way that they release features, specifically to FutureWorks. Things stay in FutureWorks on Zwift way, way, way too long. Now, if you're not familiar with the term FutureWorks, it's basically Zwift's beta. And as they test it out, it's like any beta, right? You come to market with like an 85% solution. You have people test it out with the understanding that it is technically a beta product and it's not going to be perfect. People are pretty forgiving about that. And then you would think, between 60 and 90 days, you would go from public beta to full release. Not with Zwift. Things sit in FutureWorks for way too long. It's really rather ridiculous and frustrating. I'll give you a recent example, steering. Steering has been in FutureWorks for over a year. In March, I believe, of 2020, don't quote me on the month, but it was Q1 2020, they came out with FutureWorks steering. Now, it was specific to Repack Ridge. It was just a small area. You had to make a manual turn to get over there, and it was just kind of like a little mountain biking course, a little bit gimmicky. It wasn't super popular. I wasn't really into it, but it was there for people to kind of test out the actual mechanics of moving your handlebars, right? How that would actually work out. And then they extrapolated that later on in the year, I think around August, end of August, early September, and they extended that into all of the worlds. And then all of a sudden, you started to see the value in steering. It was no longer a gimmick per se, as it was, wait a minute, this is going to be a tool for racing and for group riding. All of those things that frustrate us about like the sticky draft and getting a good position and finding the right wheel to draft on and setting up for a sprint, a lot of that would be put in the control of the riders now with steering. They came out with the Elite Sturzo, which was a steering block instead of having to kind of futz with the handlebar mount if you wanted the full smart version of it. I did a review on that in October, and I kind of had some high hopes for it. It's like, all right, well, free ride's kind of gimmicky, but I can see the value, and I think people were starting to get excited about the potential there, because how many times have you been in like a race or group ride, and like you were stuck on a wheel and you needed to get around somebody, or you wanted to get somebody off your wheel? Having the ability to steer is a complete game changer in that regard. So, I did that review, high hopes. They didn't have Ant Plus launched. They only had Bluetooth. That's usually the case. They'll launch Bluetooth first because of all of the mobile platforms. They all have Bluetooth built in, so they focus on Bluetooth first and then move backwards to Ant Plus. And I'm thinking, okay, probably 60, 90 days here. Things seem to be working really well. I'm not driving all over God's creations. I'm not glitching out. Things seem to be pretty solid here, and we'll have a full working model. I can't wait to try this out in races and group rides. So January comes along, nothing. February comes around, March, we come into the in season, nothing's happened. Okay, well, it's in season here in the Northern Hemisphere. I do 95% of my riding outdoors with some touch points on Zwift. I'm thinking, okay, more people are moving to the outdoors. This is the time of year where they make a lot of their updates because there's less volume, there's less risk to people on the platform. They got to be rolling this over soon. It is almost August. It has been almost 10 months that Zwift has had steering in full implemented FutureWorks. I'm not even going back to when they actually released it for the first time. I'm talking about from when the Elite Sturzo was released and they had it open to all of the worlds. Still no Ant Plus. So even if you're on a computer, you can't use built-in Bluetooth. You need Bluetooth Smart, so you still need an extra dongle for it. And for somebody who connects on all Ant Plus to have an extra connection, it's not a huge deal, but it's kind of a pain in the ass. So that's problem one. And problem two is it's just $120 paperweight that I'm using in particular because I don't need it for free ride. I won't use it in free ride. That's not fun for me to just move my avatar around. I want to try it out for group rides and races, and it's extremely disappointing that it's been forever. It feels like it's forever. Like it's like they dangled this carrot out in front of everybody, and then they just, I don't know, seemingly dumped it. There's been no updates. There's been no real talk about it, no releases about it. The latest was Elite released a firmware update for the Sturzo unit. May or may not be a sign of things to come in terms of implementing it for group rides and races. Maybe, maybe not. I don't want to read into something that wasn't even released by Zwift. It's extremely frustrating. And it's not just steering, right? Some people just don't give a damn about steering. I completely understand that. A lot of people care about racing. And in Q1 of last year, or the beginning of Q2, Eric Min, in an interview, talked about directly to one of the biggest concerns, which is racing and sandbagging and all the concerns there, and talking about how we have a solution on the horizon. In the next month or two, we're going to be releasing anti-sandbagging measures, and it's going to give you better results on the day, and it's going to keep that person who might be sandbagging from impacting the rest of the race. Finally, we can get rid of Zwift Power. I mean, I love what the guys had built over at Zwift Power. They did a great job, but it was always supposed to be a stopgap. And I'll talk more about racing specifically in a future video. But essentially, they had these big promises out there. It's been a year, and those events that have anti-sandbagging are still Zwift headquarters events. They are still a limited number of events on the game. I would have expected by now that it would have been almost full implementation. And I find it hard to believe that it just doesn't work, because why would they still be running some of the FutureWorks events if it didn't work at all, right? No updates, no understanding. It's just sitting there rotting on the vine in this kind of ZHQ status. Then I think several months ago, they released this weird boost mode, like this bizarre gamification, and some people like it. That's fine, to each their own, but nobody asked for that. People have been asking for them to stabilize racing. Why would you gamify something that is not stable to begin with? I don't understand that, and I get that good features are not necessarily asked for. Pace partners are a great example for that, although I do think that those might have been asked for. There are things that come out that weren't asked for, and then all of a sudden people are like, hey, that's a really good idea, actually, I really like this. But it's really frustrating to see all of like these half steps and to try to create all of these new features before you complete the ones that you promised that people are really excited or really kind of attached to. And yes, we all want more features, but not at the expense of the ones that you've already promised. And it's way too long. It's taking way too long to get through the process, and people who have been around a while are just like, what gives? I don't understand. You're trying to throw all these extra like grabs at new customers. Well, look at all the things that Zwift can do. But those people eventually are on the platform for 6 months to a year, and then they have the same damn frustrations that we do when we've been around. So I just feel like they need to follow a more of an agile development path. That's my 2 cents. I don't think I'm alone in this. I know I'm not alone in this. A lot of people in the community have been crying out for this. I would like them to see them do better. They're onboarding more folks. You know, we'll give them 2020 as a pass. They had to spend most of that year just trying to keep the platform stable to a huge influx of people that has been completely unprecedented for them, as well as not knowing what was going to go on financially, right? It was a weird year. But, you know, we're past that now. From an American company standpoint, they're bringing more people on board. They understand the stability of their customer base. It's time to start moving forward on this stuff and just kind of making up for some of that lost time, because, you know, again, I love Zwift. I'm not threatening to leave Zwift, but they're not too big to fail. And I think there are other companies that are not trying to carbon copy Zwift that might be waiting in the wings, and they kind of know the answers to the test, and they might just be looking for funding and resources that can swoop in and take over. You know, this has happened before, so I don't want to see Zwift go anywhere. I think this is one of those things that they really need to get a handle on. The last 2 things I want to talk about are more physics model related. One of them is a big deal, and one of them is just kind of a nuisance, but they'll probably never fix it, and if they don't, it is what it is, but it's worth mentioning. And the first half of that is the descending algorithm. It's ridiculous. Descending in Zwift is the most inaccurate, ridiculous part of the game. Considering how well crafted a lot of the rest of the model is, it just shocks me that they continue to allow descending to be just that off the mark. There's like this linear relationship. You make your avatar heavier and you just go faster. And I get it, all things being equal, a heavier rider is going to go downhill faster, but there's a certain limit to that. I mean, people going down switchbacks down Alpe Zwift at 65, 70 miles an hour, not ever, not in a million years. Not even the pros are doing that. I did a video some time ago. It was kind of a goofy video about getting the 100K an hour badge. And I did crank my rider weight up to like 400 pounds or something ridiculous. I don't remember what it was. That should not be possible. That is, it's just asinine, and I laugh about it because it's ridiculous, but it does actually impact real world scenarios, especially when it comes to racing. I follow a few guys out there, and I can think of one guy in particular. He's actually an A+ rider on Zwift Power, if you've ever seen the A with the black circle. High level rider, and a real life racer and rider. Like he's built like a climber. He's like 5'8" and like 130 pounds, climbs really well, really high watts per kilogram. I think he's like a high Cat 2 rider, maybe gonna be a Cat 1 at some point in the near future. So he's no joke. And I've seen some of his races where he's on mountain events, which lend itself to his strengths, right? Because he's not going to be the best flatlander. But he's on these mountain events, and he gets up to the top with maybe 2 or 3 guys, and then he gets dropped on the descents. That would never happen in the real world. I ride with guys frequently, and the guys, just by merit of being taller, are going to have a decent amount of mass on me. I've ridden with guys who are 30, 40, 50 pounds heavier than I am that descend downhill. I'm not getting dropped. Sometimes I pass them because I have a pretty small CDA, I've got good bike handling skills, I can get pretty aero, I at least hold my own. And if they are passing me or going in front of me, I always have an eye line on them. I get on Zwift and I'm going down like the backside of Epic KOM. I could beat somebody by 2 or 3 minutes to the top of that mountain, and they'll pass me like I'm going backwards within 40 seconds of the descent. Like, not in a million years would that happen. And it's really frustrating because it does impact races in a way that just, it's insurmountable. It's not a matter of strategy, right? It's not like using power-ups. It's something that's going to put people at a distinct disadvantage that wouldn't exist in the real world. It's because of this linear connection between descending and weight, and I think the descending by weight is just too high to begin with. They don't account for the curves and what you would have to do to slow down around 180-degree hairpins. And the reason that this is frustrating to me, it's like, oh yeah, it's just a game. It's not a big deal. And if you're just riding around free riding, it isn't that big of a deal. But again, we're talking about Olympics, we're talking about sanctioned races. Like, this could make or break a rider. There's no reason that somebody should have to try to sprint at 8 watts per kilogram to hold on to guys coasting downhill. Never would happen in a million years. And they went through all of this trouble, to the consternation of the vast majority of people on Zwift, to bake in this rolling resistance algorithm to the jungle and to the dirt roads a couple of years ago. People hated it. They still hate it. If you ride around the jungle now, unless you're doing a Zwift series event, there's nobody there. You have to ride through this jungle to get to Alpe de Zwift, but there's nobody there anymore. It used to be people's favorite because it was very scenic and all of the trees. It was kind of a fun area to ride, and it was different. And nobody wants to ride anymore because they were so firm. Well, we have to be realistic. This is the rolling resistance you would get on the real road, so you should be riding a mountain bike or a gravel bike. What's with the descending? Talk about realistic. Let's take care of one of the tenets of the game that really impacts racing in a way that people can't control and really does generate unfair advantages across the board. That's my 2 cents on the descending. I think that they should work on that sooner rather than later. The second piece of that, and the fourth thing and last thing I want to talk about in this video, is the kind of the extreme weighting of raw watts on flat roads. So yes, again, this is not me saying that lighter riders should always be faster. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there's a point at which higher wattage on flat roads is not always going to be faster. It's more of like a parabolic effect. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're in the meaty part of the bell curve for people's power output, so let's say between maybe like 130 watts and maybe 250 to 280 watts, people are going to be very closely matched in terms of speed against watts per kilogram, not raw watts. Because what you're going to lose in terms of raw watts for maybe a smaller rider, you're going to gain in CDA and less rolling resistance. So it's going to be a bit of an equalizer when you're talking about kind of those typical speeds of somewhere between 16 and 23 miles an hour. That's just what happens from a physics standpoint. And you can observe that out on the real road. That's what actually happens. And as you get above, 275, 280 watts up to 300 watts, at that point, you're usually picking up speed, unless you're an exceptionally heavy rider for that weight or that wattage output. That's when you get to the point where, okay, you're at a speed where you need a certain amount of power and torque to keep that acceleration, or at least maintain that speed, right? 30 miles an hour requires a lot of just raw wattage output. And it's not going to happen based on watts per kilogram, right? For me to get up to 30 miles an hour is not going to be something, I can't TT at 30 miles an hour. My raw wattage is not high enough, but I can at 25 miles an hour with a pretty high watts per kilogram. So I think that there's a break point there, and they've created a more linear path between raw watts, watts per kilogram, and speed. I think that there's more that they can do to tweak that algorithm to make it a little bit more accurate. I'll give you an anecdotal example. I was riding one of the events. I was just doing some, I think, sweet spot intervals, and I think I might have been like 3.6, 3.7 watts per kilogram. And for me, that was maybe 185 to 190 watts, if I remember correctly. And I'm riding along, just riding on my own, no drafting. And I'm looking to the right, and I see this person behind me. And the gap is just like counting down. Like with every second that passes on the clock, there's a second closing on the gap counter. I'm like, what is going on? And I look, 2.2 watts per kilogram. Like, wait, I'm going 3.7. There's got to be something wrong with the timer there. And I'm watching for a couple of seconds. I'm just like kind of distracted by it at this point, and it's not changing. Like it's doing the same thing. So I click on this rider, and I look, and they're putting out like 230 watts. So I told you it was like 2.2 watts per kilogram. That puts that rider at 100 kilograms. And I'm not throwing stones at the Clydesdale riders, man. The Clydesdales can be fast as hell. But there's not a place in the real world, period, that somebody at 100 kilograms pushing 230 watts on the real world would pass me like I'm going backwards. Not with my CDA, not with physics. It just doesn't work like that. But in Zwift, it does. And it gets a little frustrating. I guess it is what it is. You just have to learn to deal with it. The drafting model is the same thing. It's a little bit tough for smaller riders. We don't get as much of a drafting advantage, and I think we have a higher benchmark for raw wattage. And to give evidence to that, if you look inside of Zwift Power, I talked about this in the Zwift Power video, you'll see the differentiation between different classifications or different categories. You need to meet a certain raw wattage threshold as well. It's not just watts per kilogram anymore, because they understand that the model kind of favors raw watts in a disproportionate way, especially in that meaty part of the bell curve. So, yes, from time trialing perspective, if two people are both equally aerodynamic, the person with the higher raw wattage will go faster. Absolutely. But it's not linear. And it's not quite how Zwift plays it out. Again, this isn't super high priority. It's not a complete deal breaker. It is frustrating. It does frustrate some riders, and I think that having that lower categorization in Zwift Power does help to alleviate it for those people who race, so they're not being forced, maybe they do have a 4 watt per kilogram FTP, but they're a smaller rider, and they're just getting blown off the back. Like, we know that that's an issue, and we know that that doesn't carry over to the real world, right? Somebody with that same FTP out in the real world might be in that higher category, but in Zwift, they need to ride the lower category because of the physics model. I'd love to see them tweak the mathematics on that. It would certainly be a lot more subtle. They can start to kind of work that and ease that in over time. I know they've done some work on the drafting model. I think it's something that I would like to see them work on, but again, not a priority. But those are my first 4 gripes with Zwift, if you will. In no particular order, again, no preference there, more just kind of taking a sprinkling from different areas, right? Customer satisfaction, feature sets, gameplay. So let me know what you think about those 4 things. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a certain priority in mind for you on any of these 4 things? Do they impact you directly? I'd love to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments below. If you did like this video, if you wouldn't mind giving it a thumbs up, it really does help the video and the channel quite a bit. Subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, for the children, down below. And as always, I will catch you in the next one. See ya.